that we are on traditional, ancestral, and unceded Musqueam territory. And one of the things I've been reflecting on and talking a lot about is water, because because it's been reading a lot here, but reading the work of Dorothy Christian, and she talks about how we are very much a part of the watersheds that move through us. And she has a quote that when we tell the stories of ourselves, we are also telling the story of the specific waters that move through us. And that reimagining ourselves beyond our skins as a living part of a larger watershed can hold frustration, but also a lot of promise. So that's something I'm reflecting on today. And I think the topic being related to climate action and to some extent critical hope is, I feel, quite a fitting intersection. I want to welcome Dr. Becky Williams. I actually, Becky reached out to me several months ago because she had, I guess, read Critical Hope and was using it in her sustainability classes and courses on social justice. And it's kind of one of the gifts of putting pieces of writing out into the world, is that you sometimes get connected with interesting people who are doing cool work. And so Becky is visiting and we're doing a writing project together. So I'm, without further ado, going to hand it over to Dr. Becky Williams. Thank you.
So I will also give a brief statement that my university, Grand Valley State University, which is in western Michigan, near Lake Michigan, sits on the ancestral and unceded territory of the people of the three fires, the Ojibwe, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi. And I also just want to point out that I grew up on the unceded territory of the Miccosukee and Seminole peoples from Florida. And I add that in there because, it was not anything I ever thought about growing up. And, and it's something that has influenced my consciousness much later in life. And I also went to a university where the Seminole is the mascot. And this is quite problematic. The Seminole people have given their permission, but, there's a lot of interesting conversations around that. All right, so I'm going to tell you, basically, I'm going to go through today my story of trying to be an educator, or being an educator in a situation where a lot of people have lost hope. So I kind of started. So I'll go back up just a little bit. So my background, my first degree, my bachelor's degree is in music education. So I was actually a music educator for 6 years. I taught elementary school music. Then I shifted into instructional systems design, which is what I got my master's degree in, so another education degree. And I ended up working as an instructional designer for a few years. But I was always really drawn to environmental work. I didn't, when I joined college, I was 17 and, I had to make a decision as to what I was going to do with my life. And so I was really good at band. So that's what I did, and then I remember taking an environmental biology class my senior year of college, but by then it was far too late. Changed my major. So something that was always there, but I didn't really have the opportunity to go that direction. And so I ended up joining the Peace Corps, which is a 2-year, 27 months of service. You live and work in a community in a developing country. You are given no resources. You basically work with the community to try to figure out what their needs are, how you can be of service to them. We can get into the conversation on the white saviorism around that. Happy to talk about that. Peace Corps will knock that out of you very fast. It doesn't take long at all because of the way the program works. After that, from my experiences there, I decided to do my PhD in interdisciplinary ecology. So I have 2 education degrees and an ecology degree, essentially. So I went on and I became a professor and was researching one day to update some numbers for a presentation I was doing on sea level rise. And I had seen that we were on the RCPP path of 8.5, which is the worst case scenario for sea level rise. And I was thinking, is this accurate? I wanted to double check. This seems like pretty severe. I thought things were doing better. And I hadn't read the IPCC report from 2023, so I went and tracked it down and I verified the numbers. And then I was like, what in the heck? And then I started reading the other overview and I started watching the presentations on it. And it pushed me into a complete sense of despair. I completely lost all hope. I mean, I really did. I couldn't get out of bed. It absolutely broke me because I've been studying and teaching from the perspective of climate mitigation. and adaptation, but I really believed in mitigation and that we could walk things back. In this report, there was one quote that I tried to find and I couldn't find it, but essentially they said by the time the next report comes out, it's too late. And just the overwhelming sadness and grief that I got out of that, it really hit me hard. And I was a college professor having to stand in front of 30 students, 40 students, and teach them about environmental sustainability with any type of how do we move forward, knowing that I was in a position where I had completely given up. And I reached a pretty bad despair. I did start going to a therapist. I remember my therapist asked me to write down everything I was worried about, and I was like, all right. So I wrote down, came back, I read the list, and she goes, "You're worried about all of that?" I was like, "Yeah." And so she started really working with me on my own mental health aspect, and I didn't even know. I've been seeing therapists since I was 20 years old, like any good person trying to self-discover, and I had no idea how to even begin with something that it felt like my entire world had kind of imploded. So I want to take a bit of a step back and just to give you some context in my research, and I also want you to feel some anxiety that we're feeling in the States right now. So a lot of my work is around sustainable development, specifically around gender and development and empowerment. I am happy to talk more about the colonial nature of this work as we go forward. I will say that because of my experiences in the Peace Corps, I believe very strongly in working directly with communities from a participatory action perspective. But I enjoyed taking money from the big development agencies to do that. And so, so you can see on the one side, really working with indigenous people, the indigenous Lenca of Honduras, as well as deep into working around gender and intersectionality. And then also, I moved into looking at what was driving irregular migration in the United States from Central America. So here's how that's going. So USAID, your side of that here is CETA. USAID was dismantled overnight. That is 15 years of my work. They paid for my graduate program. My PhD program was completely funded by USAID through a large grant on agriculture, climate smart agriculture. All of my research has been taken off all of the portals. All of the databases have been deleted. So all the places where I was required by the federal government to upload all my data, all those databases are gone. The entire website is gone. They essentially abandoned people all over, USAID workers all over the place. There's a lot of horrible stories about the things that have happened to them. But most people in the US don't know that USAID funds a massive amount of research, specifically around, some of these issues. So overnight, 15 years of my work was completely wiped out, including all of my research funding. So there was a lot of crying in my house. And it's been really, really hard. Again, USAID, I consider USAID to be a very colonial arm of the United States. However, they also do a lot of really good work, especially around things like AIDS, HIV. And it's all just we're already seeing millions of deaths worldwide from just removing them with no warning. In terms of service for my university, we all have to do service and tenure track jobs. I do a lot of different things, but the one that's most relevant really is that I am one of the on our DEI committee. DEI has become a bad acronym word in the United States. I worked with my university in my college to identify the issues around race and gender, things like that within our college to come up with a strategic plan on how to actually address those, both with faculty, staff, and students, because we're aware that we don't provide students, especially my university tends to recruit heavily from minoritized communities and then doesn't provide them with the resources that they need to succeed. So this just happened a couple days ago. My university is one of 50 that's being investigated as part of anti-DEI efforts. This right now is centered around admissions and our scholarships that we have, because we have a lot of scholarships that are aimed at bringing first-generation college students, minoritized and indigenous college students into our university. So basically, right now, we've put all of this work behind firewalls in the intent to not identify the specific professors that are involved. But we are anticipating very big crackdowns on DEI at universities. We know it's coming. Right now it's focused on admissions, but we know that it's going to come after our classes and our research. I also love consulting. I'm a professional facilitator. I mainly work with NGOs and communities that focus on conservation and development work. And so I've worked doing a lot of DEI work for different associations, for universities. And then I most recently have worked with SIGLR, which is a Great Lakes Research Institute that partners with NOAA. And NOAA is being decimated. They've already received about 40% budget cuts. NOAA is the National Oceanic and Aeronautic Administration. They do all of our weather research, a lot of climate research. They research like a lot of issues around the Great Lakes, especially around like PFAS, microplastics, but also just things like fisheries, things like that. So they are where pretty much all of our weather information comes from. Like when I check my phone, that's all NOAA information. So SIGLR partners with them, and I was basically tasked with helping SIGLR with their 5-year plan, knowing that NOAA was about to be completely gutted, which was really challenging to stand in front of 60 people and help them figure out their strategic plan when they know that they're going to lose half their funding. Around teaching, because I'm interdisciplinary, I have a lot of kind of different things that I dip into, but you can kind of see these are kind of some of my classes at GDSU, a lot around environmental sustainability. I'm going to talk about wicked problems of sustainability today. I also teach around social impact and gender. And then when I was at the University of Florida, before I came here, I was there for 6 years. I taught these other courses, and like I mentioned, the two at the bottom, gender and the environment, and intersectionality and environmental justice, are both banned courses, and the content in those courses is now not legal to teach in the state of Florida. So this is kind of how that's going. Again, they've actually launched an NDEI portal for our K-12 school system, where you can go and complain about a teacher that's too woke, and you can report on them, which is awesome. They also have a website that you can report on colleagues within federal government for talking about race or gender or any of those different things. Now, one thing that I would say is that there's some really awesome pushback against that, where people are sending things like the entire scripts of movies to spam it. They've crashed the website multiple times through spamming it, which has been pretty awesome. But it's still really very this McCarthyist, kind of purge that's happening. Trump is really going after schools that teach critical race theory. I was telling Dr. Grant on the way here that critical race theory was banned teaching in Florida before I left. So now I essentially figure out a reason to teach it in every single one of my classes. And I can make it relevant to everything, so I just teach it constantly because I like to teach it to my students and then ask them if they think it should be banned. Which universally they say no. Here's some other awesome things that are happening. So across the board, research funding has been decimated, if not completely taken away. There's now, my favorite of the headlines is Trump's FBI moves to criminally charge climate groups. So they are now saying that people who've taken federal money to research climate change have committed fraud. I've taken about $250,000 in federal funds for climate change research. Right now they're going after the banks, but we still anticipate that they are soon to come after researchers. They have absolutely decimated the EPA. They just removed or gutted 31 different climate protections, or including things in our Clean Water and Clean Air Act. They've dropped lawsuits against pretty much all the petrochemical companies, and just basically letting them get away with all the things that they've done. Obviously, as you know, we've withdrawn from the Paris Agreement. We're one of 2 countries that have done that. And now they are going to revise our position that climate change, first of all, the climate change is real, but also that climate change is a real extant danger to humans. Because once they change that position, then all climate change work can be eliminated. So just if you're not stressed out enough yet, just these are some of my favorite tweets from Trump, as well as some of the cartoons around him. But this is the kind of language that's being used. After years of being held captive by environmental extremists, lunatics, radicals, and thugs, and they're talking about climate researchers, people working in environmental sustainability, and so on and so forth. So this is the environment I'm trying to teach in. And just to really bring it home, if not stressed out enough, this is a list of words that are banned in federal reports. So we cannot say or use any of these words. They are also using AI to scrub all the existing databases, remove anything that has any of these words. That's ended up with some amusing things like people whose last name being gay being taken off of different things. A lot of things like that on the funny side, but on the not so funny side, even this morning when I woke up, the Marco Rubio had taken the entire LGBTQ population out of our human rights report. So it's pretty scary. As somebody working in climate, here's some words that make it very hard. If you can't use the word bias when you're talking about research, you can't use the word sex. That makes doing research pretty tough. These are the words that I use in my research because I am a human dimensions researcher and I research social justice type topics. So all of these things I cannot say in federal funding. And these are the words I use in my classroom. There's two that I don't use, and I think I probably do, but I don't think I talk about breastfeeding terribly often in my classroom. Or men seeking men. I think, although I may have, I wouldn't be surprised if all of those were there. So it's pretty tough right now. How'd that get in there? Sorry, that slide shouldn't be in there. Definitely not stressed out at all. So that brings me to wicked problems of sustainability. So after I had my existential crisis about the IPCC report, they assigned me to teach this class, Wicked Problems of Sustainability, which is essentially a class on unsolved problems. And then they want me to teach this class. And I have completely lost all hope, and I don't know what to do. So like any good academic, I just started desperately reading anything I could get my hands on. Articles, I read about dark humor. I read about a book called I Want a Better Catastrophe that talks about okay, we're in trouble, we're screwed, so now what? And then that's how I came across Kari's work. And I decided okay, well, it kind of brought me out of my funk. In a lot of ways because many of the pieces that I have learned over the years myself, but also through my training, were evident in that book, but put together in such a way that I hadn't thought about before. And it kind of was okay, it was a pathway that gave me a kind of a way to talk about this with my colleagues and with my students. People are probably really tired of me talking about this book now. I sold a lot of copies for you. So first day of class, I like to do a lot of community building in the beginning of my classes. And so I had them kind of draw how they were feeling about the state of climate change. And it's not good. When they reported out, I was like, oh my gosh, they are not okay. Every single group drew a world on fire. A lot of dead flowers up there. Snoopy is sad about climate change because the roof is too hot on his little house. I know, I was like, oh my gosh. We have Americans looking the other way. We have a sad face on the American flag. Just all kinds of, and we had a green Christmas, and so that's up there as well. I think up in the upper right-hand corner, I think that's like an anti-corporation type deal. But we do have two nice things. We have a "We've got this" and "We've got excited to learn more." So, but overall, when they put these up on the walls, I was like, oh boy, this is tough. So I had two assigned readings for this class on wicked problems. We did a lot of, course, articles and stuff, but two assigned books. One was the book on critical hope, and one was on systems thinking for social change. So if you're not familiar with Dr. Crane's work, she goes through these principles of critical hope, and I have an asterisk there because I think it's really important that while these 7 principles are really incredibly, they really synthesize the different things that she's trying to get across in her book, there's much more to the book than just these 7 principles. And before she gets into the principles, she talks a lot about things like consciousness raising and critical consciousness. And those things, I think, are not necessarily well reflected in the 7 principles, but they are really important pieces of this. But this was a nice way for me to start having this conversation with students and also be transparent with them that I was feeling defeated myself. So at the beginning of the class, we did a 2-week intensive deep dive into critical hope. I mean, like, I was worried that I was going too far off script of doing sustainability work. But I decided that, you know, my students were honestly in pretty bad shape themselves. They also are feeling very defeated. So we went deep into what wicked problems are, and climate change is a super wicked problem. We dug into critical consciousness with supplementary materials. We dug in each student's. I only had a couple of weeks, so the students were assigned different principles. They self-taught each other about all these different principles, and we had these really fun, intense conversations. Then they wrote some essays on hope. If I was clever, I would have had them do the essays on hope first. So lesson learned for next time. Then introduce critical hope, so I think I got a little bit of muddy results in that, but that's okay. And then we interrogated what that meant. So here are my students at the beginning of the semester. I feel like the words hope and future contradict each other. This is the first one I read, too. Having real genuine hope in the future of the world seems impossible without being ignorant or misinformed, because last I checked, we've been nonstop causing incomprehensible damage to our planet since the dawn of civilization, so much that we are well past the point of no return in terms of permanent damage to the natural world. So this is my student that I'm having to then now also talk about problems that are so challenging that they could potentially be unsolvable, or that when we try to solve them, we don't really know how that's going to have, effects throughout the different systems. So here's another one. Hope is a feeling of desire that cannot or will not always be fulfilled. As a 22-year-old multiracial woman who studies environmental sustainability, I am always hoping for a clean and safe future to live in and learn in, and for changes in the way racial minorities and women experience the world. But do I have hope for the future? No, I do not. My personal experiences and the education that I've gained both in and out of school have helped me realize this, which that makes me sad, since have helped me realize this. Even with this new generation of young adults that are advocating for climate change, racial justice, and mental health advocacy, wicked problems like education, politics, systemic racism, and rich white men will overpower it. I haven't talked to this student this semester, now that Trump is in office and rich white men are destroying the country from within, but this was a tough one to read too. So I'm gonna read just a couple more for you. So before this week, I had a mixed perception of hope. I knew about toxic positivity and how positive or wishful thinking isn't enough to result in change. But on the other hand, hearing people say that they wish for things to be different, just as I did, made me feel optimistic for the future. However, after that initial optimism, I would think about everything that actually needs to happen for real change to take place, and I would feel hopeless. I criticized my own hope as toxic positivity and worried that other people were falling into the same trap, unhelpful, unproductive hope. Then eventually something would make me hopeful again, and that cycle would play out over and over. And I've got more as well. I don't want to, I'll just read a couple lines from this one. I'm not completely hopeless. Like-minded peers and people give me hope for the future. And I did see that throughout my essays, that my students felt hope in their peers, that the young generation really wants to solve this problem. And that's one of the places where I did see that they are feeling a sense of hope. And this person says that too: my greatest source of hope is the younger generation who are deeply committed to justice and are actively advocating for it. But there are still days when I show sustained hope. And then they go on to say how hopelessness takes over, and then the things that we know about corporations and greenwashing and developing countries being underrepresented in the conversations about climate change. So this is a junior senior level class. So a lot of these students have already been exposed to a lot of these ideas. And this is what I see oftentimes, that they come in their first year out of high school, and they're super jazzed, excited, and they're gonna ready to take on the world, and then we kind of like beat them to death over the next 4 years with everything that's going wrong and no tangible ways to tell them to fix it. So by the time they're juniors and seniors, they're just like, and I get a lot of them in my office that are just like, what do I do with my life? And I'm just like, oh my gosh, you guys, we need to figure out a better way to teach them. So then I created this semester project based on critical hope. And there's these two little pieces here that particularly resonated with me. Maybe because they're really short and sweet, but they're things that I could turn into something that students could do. And I just want to briefly touch on regeneration of safety and connection. And this is a little bit out of context of the book, but for me, it was really important to create a classroom environment that students felt like they were safe with me and each other to have these really difficult conversations, and to be very open about the fact that everybody in the room was depressed. So I spent a lot of time building community in my classroom to do that, and in the hopes of helping them. And it was very interesting the connections that they did make over this semester. They ended up creating friendships that are still persistent. Like they'll send me pictures of themselves like out to dinner together and things like that. But the other thing that I did is this: I did not grade in this class. This was an ungraded class. So we took away all points. We talked about how we would assess. They created a plan with me on how we would assess their learning. We all, agreed on it. We reached consensus on how that would be. And taking that out of the equation really changed the game for this entire conversation. I don't do that for all of my classes, but I do for my classes around social justice, and especially around, when I'm digging into these really intense, systematic, issues. It makes it difficult to be then wielding my power over them in terms of their grades. Now, obviously, at the end of the semester, I still give them a grade, but we do that together. And there's evidence that they have throughout the semester that we talk about. I think that's important because I think that it did create the space for them to be able to actually do this work. My students are exhausted. We cater to, our university is a regional state university. Most of our students are on some type of financial aid. We have a lot of students that are first generation college students, so the first people in their family to go to college. All of them are working 20, 30, 40 hours a week. And they're exhausted and they are also stressed. So one of the things that they were required to do was take care of their mental health. I was worried when I assigned this because I was worried that they were so stressed and so busy that asking them to do something like this will cause them additional stress, even though I know from my own therapy that that's not how that works. But in your brain, when you're really stressed out, you should go take a walk. But if you go take a walk, you're gonna leave your computer for 15 minutes, and God only knows if you have your brilliant stroke of genius in that 15 minutes, you won't get your laptop. So I had them do this. They could choose any of these activities. They could propose activities, and they had a certain number of hours. They had to do them every week, and that was the first part, was just really focusing in on developing these positive coping skills. Obviously, just working on your mental health is not enough. So the students had to get involved as well. They could join a student organization, they could volunteer. This is prior to the November 5th election, so I was really, really desperately trying to get my students involved in voting and in politics. Didn't work. Actually, I take it back. My students did. I actually got the extra credit for voting, and almost all my students voted. But generally, they're pretty disengaged. And they could propose their own activity, but it had to be something that was important to them. I didn't prescribe. I gave them a list of options of different student groups, but I told them they could go outside of that. The list that I gave them were all social justice, environmental justice focused groups, things like that. And then every week they had reflections and check-ins, and that was part of the self-grading process. So they would let me know how it was going, where they were having tensions or troubles, when they were too busy. These are some examples of some of the things that they did. So some of them were out there doing campus cleanups. Some of them did, like I said, did arts and music. I had students pick up an instrument for the very first time. And they sent me songs at the end of the semester. It was incredible. I was like one of the best, as a former musician too, I was like, my students are making music. People who took up painting. This student had never painted a day in her life, and just all these different things. And like I said, I was really worried, but as the semester went on, they would start talking about how transformative it was for them, because a lot of times they wanted to do these things, but they didn't feel like they had the time or the space to do that. And so me making it a requirement for the class gave them the opportunity to join the groups and to start to participate and take care of their mental health in a way that they weren't before. And they would often say, I really didn't want to, today, because I was really busy. And so I went ahead and made myself do it. And I went outside and I played Pokemon Go for half an hour. And then I came back and I felt 1,000 times better. Right. Meanwhile, by the way, I'm at home not doing any of the things I'm supposed to be doing. And I'm looking at my students' work and I'm like, wow, this looks like something that I should be trying. That's not entirely true. I did actually, I think modeling and being vulnerable in the classroom is extremely important. So I told them, I'm not going to ask you to do anything that I'm not doing. So I started doing something called Zen doodling. It's just a messy whatever. November 5th came, Trump was elected. I fell into another despair. It was about 2 weeks, I think, that my wife and I just stared and didn't say much. And the day after the election, some guy, I don't remember even who it was, but he came out saying, "Your body, my choice," and that became this rallying cry on the right of "Your body, my choice." And I was so full of rage. And I drew this, and I don't. This might be hard to see, but underneath it is those are the 7 swing states that ultimately were responsible for getting Donald Trump elected. And then over here, that was just like throwing some watercolor on the page, and then just using ink to. So I would share these things with my students. Before this, I had this much calmer stuff, and I would share that with them too, and talk about my own struggles with trying to do this work. And again, I think that opened up for them to be able to share as well. But again, those 2 things are not enough. You really have to dig into, the students really have to understand that we have these systems that are fundamentally flawed. They're based in bias. And especially with our history in the United States, like our mass incarceration issues, it's just the systemic violence that we have. So we dug deep into systems thinking. This is a picture from early childhood education, but we also went into, like I said, mass incarceration and the policing system in the United States. I had them watch a documentary called 13th, which is about our 13th Amendment, which allows for slavery if a person has committed a crime. It does not tell you what a crime is in the 13th Amendment. That amendment is what allowed for Jim Crow, which was essentially after slavery ended, it didn't really end. It was just indentured servitude rather than flat out slavery. That lasted until the civil rights movement. And even then it didn't end, because what essentially happened is they the government used things like crack cocaine as a way to control communities, use mass incarceration as a way to undermine political action that was being done. There's even a quote by one of Nixon's cabinet guys that basically said that the way to control Black communities and hippies was through the prohibition of like marijuana and things like that. That was used as a mechanism to undermine movements, especially like the Black Panther movement, for example. So we dug into that very deeply. And it was, my students were predominantly white in that class, and I think a lot of it was hard for them. They had no idea about a lot of these things. So, it's not something we teach in our public school systems, because we don't like to teach things that make America look bad. And so for a lot of them, it was very eye-opening to see that our policing system in the U.S. was based off of slavery. It came out of slave catching, and that is where our policing system actually originated. And that has never changed over time, really. And so the targeting of minoritized communities in the United States is well documented, but people still like to say that it didn't happen, even though 1 out of 4 Black men in the United States is incarcerated at some point in their life. 1 out of 16 white men are. And even though in a lot of the crimes that Black men, especially low-level crimes that Black men are committing, we see actually much harsher prison sentences for them than we do white people, and so on and so forth, which is not surprising to any of you. But students sometimes push back, right? They sometimes have a really hard time actually accepting that we have systems that are biased and that are based on inequalities. Especially like this student Karen. Her name really is Karen. It's funny, I didn't. It's not a Karen. It's just a really sweet young lady who was in my class, and she says, they had a weekly journal that they would write. And they'd write about whatever they wanted, and she said, I was having a difficult time wrapping my head around the concept of privilege. I definitely realized that I have privilege, but what if a minority grew up in the same as me and has as many opportunities as me? Do I still have more privilege than just because I'm white? I feel like I'm having a hard time understanding, because I don't see people as minorities or Black, I just see them as people, which is very sweet. But it's also quite naive. Now, I was surprised when I read this, because we introduced this very early in our program. So they're juniors, but then I didn't think about the fact that we also get transfer students in, who have maybe never been exposed to these ideas. And so as an educator, I had that moment where I'm like, oh my gosh, if she doesn't get this, then somebody else doesn't get it too. So we have to stop and take a step back. So I basically just halted what we were doing dead in its tracks. In the next class period, we focused on privilege. And really, I like to use participatory things. So we created these activities. I had this activity that really does a good job of illustrating privilege right then and there in the classroom. It's not one of the like stand for type things. It's a little bit more. It's designed to not put minoritized people on the spot. It's designed to actually make people self-reflect. And so in their next journal, she writes about it. During this week, I learned a lot about privilege and plastic pollution because that was the other day. On Tuesday, we did an activity about how much privilege we think someone has. It made me kind of sad because I think it's dumb that just because a person is black means they have less privilege than a white person. Why do they get longer sentencing than a white person? Still confuses me that people out there are still that racist. People should not be judged by their skin color, they should be judged by their actions. This last sentence has become very weaponized in the United States on this meritocracy stuff. Now again, when I read this, I was like, okay, I kind of got the sort of, not really, but kind of. But this student continued to reflect on this throughout the rest of the semester, and I would bring it up. I would point out little things throughout the semester just to reinforce these ideas of how these systems function. And by towards the end of the semester, I do an activity where they do this mind dump everything they've learned on a giant piece of paper, and it's rotating group activity. And then I asked them to circle the one thing for them that's been the most impactful or important. And she circled privilege. And she was like, it's basically said like it's sinking in. I'm starting to understand, this. And it still made her really angry, but I was like, good, it should make you angry. And at the end of the semester, when she wrote her final essay on critical hope, she mentions privilege again. So I think that I did actually, over the course of the semester, slowly brought her into that conversation in a different way, which was, I think, really important. This is one of the guiding principles of critical hope is intimately entangled with the body and the land. This is not quite what Dr. Graham was talking about here. However, one way that I was able to get students kind of more grounded in the space that they were in is so we went on several field trips that were based around the different things we were learning. So they had never been to a landfill before. They had never done a river cleanup, some of them. They'd never been out to our agricultural farm. And so when we would have a case study that was about a specific sustainability issue, we would then go on a field trip so that they could kind of like dig in and see. And that was actually ended up being incredibly transformative for them as well. I thought it was just gonna be fun, and they asked for that when we collaboratively designed part of the class. But it was, and even for me, seeing the landfill was mind blowing. I mean, the scale of it was astronomical. It looked like little toy trucks that were down in the pit, and it just blew my students' mind. And while they're already very focused on sustainability, I think it really changed a lot of their perspectives. But then we dug into something that we could actually address, and that was important for me that they could practice all of this on a real case study. So we went into our food system at our university. We did very deep dive. They worked in teams. We did a team charter, again, trying to build that sense of respect for each other. They did a report on one of those three views of food. And then I trained them on how to do interviews. I didn't just throw them to the wolves. We did some practice and some training, but we identified all the stakeholders around food systems on our campus. And then the students went out and interviewed them. They had to analyze that and create a systems map based off of what they learned. And this is when students started becoming really shocked at how our food system actually works. They didn't know, and I didn't tell them because I wanted them to find out on their own, but they didn't know that our contract is with Aramark, which is a massive corporation that uses prison labor. So when they started digging into it, they started realizing that, we are a contract with a company that is known to be using prison labor, including for its food production. They didn't know that students were not allowed to share meal plans, which myself, when I was an undergraduate, I was on my own. I didn't have anybody to ask for help, for money. And so my roommate, I think, fed me for 2 years off of her meal plan. That was the only way I got through college. And in my university, it's prohibited, cannot share your meal plan because it gives them a higher profit margin. So these things, they started digging into that were reflecting these other larger systematic issues in society, but right at our university level. So we took that and then we invited all those same actors as well as a whole bunch of other people to some participatory workshops. I taught them some very basic facilitation skills, so we practiced it. Kind of assigned them roles based off of their confidence level, so that they could like all have something to do. Pushed all of them outside of their comfort zone to do that, but they ended up, holding. And I'll show you a picture of that in a minute. And then they did a final report. So, like I said, they started digging in and finding some really interesting things. Like, for example, our university administration does not believe that there's a food security issue on our campus. I don't know how they couldn't when almost all of our students are first gen or working or on financial aid. I mean, it's asinine. And they actually have asked, we have a food bank on campus, and they asked our food bank, when they asked for money, they asked them to prove that it's actually a problem on our campus. I myself have bought students food and sent them to the food bank. Our food bank, and I didn't know this, the students found this out, our food bank is $500 a year in funding. All of their funding is donated. And so we have a food bank on campus that gets zero funding, it has no support from our administration, and they are trying to serve a population of largely, again, minoritized students, first generation students, poor working class students, while pretending that we don't have a food security issue on our campus. So the discomfort was for real on the students' part in terms of pushing them, not only in their thinking, in their anger, in their understanding of the system, which they didn't know any of this before, but also pushing them outside their comfort zone to get in front of people, to do interviews, the real work that we do, like in research. But for them, it was really scary. And then, like I said, we really connected this to a lot of the larger systemic issues in the United States. Also, we learned a lot about students who needed food services, but they were afraid to access it because of stigma. We learned about some misperceptions, like people thought that it was mainly international students who were accessing it, and we learned that was actually not the case. And so people were vilifying our international students, while not recognizing that it was actually not our international students who were largely, but also the students learned from this that our international students are largely the labor on our campus in our food system because they can pay them less, right? And so they get paid something like $9 an hour, and they get away with it because they're international students that are here on these visas and they can only work on campus, based on how our visas work. So again, it's just reflecting these other issues in society. And my students really got pissed off. Really, I had to calm them down at times because they came into my class just raging against the university for how angry they were. So all of this gets put into, we're reaching the end of the semester. All of this goes into a report. We created a plan for what the next semester students were going to do so that they felt some continuity. So this is going to be over semesters that we're working on this project to address these food systems issues. So that is the plan, is that we're actually going to start trying to address some of these issues. Later, this ended up dovetailing. A lot of my students now are working at our agriculture farm. A lot of them have gone and changed their focus to looking at food systems and things like that as well. So we reached the end of the semester. We've done all this work. They're working on their mental health. They're getting active. We're doing a deep dive. We're talking about systems. And this is what I get at the end of the semester. I know I'm talking a lot, and so I'll be done here soon. So my project changed my views on hope by showing me how to take action. I had known what toxic positivity was, and I knew that simply hoping was generally unproductive. However, I did not know what the alternative was. This project showed me that there's another kind of hope, a kind that truly is helpful and productive. It showed me that it's okay to feel anger and all these emotions associated with issues like climate change. This student says, I'll skip down a little bit. The conventional idea of hope alone is ineffective as it's built on optimistic ideas without any action. To me, hope involves humility, action, uncertainty, and optimism. They really had to read that they understand that uncertainty. This definition of critical hope allows one to acknowledge the uncomfortable reality of a system while still finding the motivation and courage to continue working towards a goal. This one says, essentially, critical hope focuses on destroying harmful systems and creating new systems that try to benefit everyone, requires action towards change and social justice. You must understand the aspects of economic, political, and social realities, knowing that inequality and injustice exists. I was in tears, by the way. So I was like, there's a purpose to my life. And then over here, this student is talking in the beginning about how hard it was to time student projects because of time or whatever. And so these moments highlighted the importance of self-awareness in maintaining critical hope. She talks about the value of participating in the Citizens Climate Lobby, which is a lobby group around climate policy. That was what she decided to do for her project. So setbacks are inevitable, and to view them as opportunities for reflection and growth rather than reasons to disengage. These experiences underscore that critical hope isn't just about believing in better outcomes, but actively working towards them through collaboration and sustained effort. And again, that sustained effort is not something that I've talked about in this presentation, but it is talked about in the book, about the incrementalness of this. Just hoping for these is not enough anymore. I will always aim to stay grounded in the reality of the complexity of the issues at hand, but use this reality to fuel my outrage and work towards change. And I just got to publish one. I now understand my place in the world on a smaller, more impactful scale, and the ability to accept the limitations of my capability to help, but also the power I have to make small change towards the larger cause. So students have a tendency to look at like the grandness of the problem and want to like solve the grandness of the problem. And they really need to understand that, you know, what is your sphere of influence and how can you, where is it that you can insert in this problem and actually make sustained change? And this is what I like is be curious and learn about the world, get in the habit of taking action. But this last one, this critical hope project is one that I will not forget. For the first time in my life, I took the time to learn about my well-being and mental health. I learned more about myself during these 3 months than I ever did before. And I was like, holy moly. And then this is the last one, but small meaningful actions. I should be looking at all the steps I completed to get to where I am today. I feel more motivated and less overwhelmed. And each small action helps to build a better, more sustainable future. Every single one of their reflections looks just like these. Every single one of them. I mean, and that's when I emailed Kari, and I was like, your work! It's a missing link! You know, and so, and I was just like, my mind was blown. I had seen over the semester these incremental changes in them and their reflections, but when I had a chance to step back and really reflect over the semester, it was mind-blowing, and they still, when I see them, they still talk about this project. I have 6 of them in the class again this semester, and they're still, a lot of them doing the same things that they were doing before, and they talk about how impactful that was. So here's just a couple of pictures of some of the things that students were doing. Some did art, some went hiking, some played tennis for their mental health. Some alternative breaks is a week-long spring break volunteering trip that students can go on. And that's our sustainable agriculture project at the bottom, so a lot of students got involved in that. All kinds of different things. It was all over the spectrum. It kind of fit their various personalities. This one on the bottom left there, who is water skiing, she talked about how she had never tried anything hard before, essentially, and that she was so scared to do it, but for the project she decided to do it. Now she water skis, and she's like, it like blew her mind. You know, she's like, I can do this thing, I can do hard things, and I was like, you know. So just to close up, in terms of some thoughts, pedagogically, I've taught systems thinking in my classes, and I've taught these things before, but the thought of how you move them through this conversation and this self-reflection and the building of an ability to hold hope, that, you know, that it is a practice and that you do have to work at it, and that, you know, your mental health is very important, and so is taking action, but also is understanding these systems and accepting that they're flawed. They are flawed. Scholarship and teaching and learning. I'd like to turn some of this into research on a more, you know, this was an experiment I was super happy with, and now I want to do a little bit more of a scholarly look at it to see, you know, where do they start, where do they end up, where do they end over time, to see if these things persist farther than this semester, which I suspect that they do just based off the conversations that I've had with current students, but I don't know, and I'd like to know. And then for me, like I mentioned earlier, working in international development, my research has been completely decimated, and it's all gone. And so I've had to take a step back and rethink, what do I do now? I mean, I could continue to try to work in the issues that I'm in, but I think that there is a very ripe conversation to be had, not just about the education around climate change, but the way that we approach the work in climate change spheres. The actual work of mitigation and adaptation and what comes next. And I'd like to start using Dr. Green's work to interrogate the different frameworks that we are using around climate action and around like how we address climate change. Because I think that this is a missing piece, And it's also something I've observed on the ground in my own research and working with communities, and the ones that are able to persist and the ones that are really suffer. So I hope I didn't talk, I kind of got into it there.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.